A man hangs by his ribs, the iron tearing through his flesh. His screams echo off the stone walls as children watch from their father's shoulders. This isn't war. This is justice. For 600 years, this was how Europe taught obedience. One hook at a time. Imagine a time when justice wasn't delivered behind closed doors, but was a horrifying spectacle for all to see. In the heart of a bustling town square, a crowd gathers. They're not here for a market day, but to witness a chilling performance of power and pain. Vendors have closed their stalls. Children are lifted onto their father's shoulders for a better view. And at the center of it all is a simple, brutal piece of iron that would haunt the nightmares of generations: the executioner's hook. This wasn't an instrument of swift death. Beheading, hanging, even burning at the stake could, by chance or design, offer a quicker end. The hook offered no such mercy. It was created for one reason: to turn a human being into a public lesson, suspended between life and death for as long as physically possible. For centuries, from the heart of the medieval period to the dawn of the industrial age, this tool symbolized the absolute and terrifying power of the state. This is the story of its reign, an era written in flesh and remembered in iron. What turns a tool into an object of pure terror? If you walked into a medieval butcher's shop, you'd see dozens of hooks lining the walls, bearing the weight of animal carcasses. They were common, essential tools, but in the hands of the state, this mundane object was transformed. While it was known in German as the Fleischerhaken, or butcher's hook, this was no repurposed tool. It was an instrument of the law, specifically forged to punish people, taking a familiar shape and twisting its purpose from sustaining life to prolonging death. This hook wasn't hidden away in some dark dungeon. It was an officially sanctioned instrument wielded by licensed executioners, whose work was meticulously documented by city scribes. In cities across Europe, from Amsterdam to Nuremberg, hooks were kept in municipal armories or even fixed permanently to public buildings as a constant, silent warning. In Amsterdam, hooks were attached to the exterior wall of the Waag, the central weighing house on Newmarket Square, a place of commerce forever linked with consequence. In Nuremberg, a city infamous for its instruments of torture, they were stored in a tower called the Lochgefängnis, alongside the wheels, pincers, and racks that made the city's justice system notorious. The hook's very existence, displayed openly, was a form of psychological warfare, a promise of what awaited those who dared to transgress. To understand the true horror of the hook, we have to understand its mechanics. This wasn't a single device, but an adaptable instrument of agony, each application designed to maximize suffering. The most infamous method involved the rib cage. The executioner, a craftsman in his grim trade, would feel for the space between the victim's ribs. With a forceful thrust, the sharpened point would pierce skin and muscle, carefully guided to avoid the heart and lungs. The victim was then hoisted into the air, left to hang as their own body weight became the instrument of torture, slowly tearing the flesh. Death was never immediate. It would arrive slowly, delivered by shock, blood loss, or exposure over hours or even days. Records from the Holy Roman Empire describe victims who survived on the hook through the night, their pleas echoing between the buildings until dawn finally brought the mercy of unconsciousness. Then there was the throat hook, sometimes called the whisperer. Inserted through the soft tissue under the jaw, its purpose was slow suffocation, turning every breath into a desperate, rasping struggle. Depending on the placement, it could sever arteries for a quicker death by bleeding, or it could slowly crush the airway. Finally, there was the massive suspension hook, used not just for an individual, but as a permanent fixture of state terror. The most chilling example comes from Münster in 1535. After the Anabaptist rebellion was crushed, its leaders were captured. Jan van Leyden and his lieutenants were publicly tortured with red-hot pincers for over an hour before being killed with daggers. But their punishment didn't end with death. Their bodies were placed into 3 iron cages and hung from hooks on the high tower of St. Lambert's Church. For decades, their remains rotted in full view of the city, a grotesque and enduring warning. The cages still hang there today, empty but potent reminders of a time when justice demanded that punishment outlast life itself. The true power of the executioner's hook wasn't just in the physical pain it inflicted on one person, but in the psychological trauma it inflicted on thousands. Public executions were a form of mass communication, a visceral and unforgettable sermon on the consequences of disobedience. The suffering of the condemned was a tool to enforce compliance and assert the absolute authority of the church and state. The placement of the hook was often deeply symbolic. A hook through the abdomen could be a statement against gluttony or lust. Piercing the mouth was a punishment reserved for blasphemy or perjury. A hook through the back, near the ribs, might symbolize the treachery of a backstabber. The law wasn't just being enforced, it was being performed, with each wound carrying a specific, terrifying meaning for the crowd. This theater of fear had a profound and complex effect on society. It was intended to instill respect for authority, and in many ways it worked. But it also desensitized entire populations to horrific violence. Executions became a form of grim entertainment. People would travel from surrounding villages to witness the spectacle, turning the suffering of another human being into a public show. This constant exposure to state-sanctioned cruelty had lasting effects, creating a culture where violence was normalized and fear was a cornerstone of social order. It fostered anxiety, a distrust of justice, and perpetuated a cycle of violence that would shape generations. In this theater of cruelty, one figure stood at the center, both revered and reviled: the executioner. He wasn't a crazed killer, but a civic employee, a licensed professional tasked with carrying out the state's most brutal orders. In many cities, the position was hereditary, a grim trade passed down from father to son. They were skilled craftsmen, experts in anatomy, who knew precisely how to inflict maximum pain without granting the mercy of a quick death. Yet, this profession came at a terrible cost. Executioners were social pariahs. They were often forced to live on the outskirts of town, and other citizens would avoid their touch, believing it to be unclean. Their families were ostracized, their children shunned. They were essential to the machinery of justice, yet they were treated as if they were criminals themselves. The psychological toll was immense. The act of repeatedly torturing and killing people, of looking into their eyes and being the direct instrument of their agonizing end, left deep and permanent scars. Historical records, though scarce, paint a picture of men haunted by their work. Many suffered from what we would now recognize as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. They were plagued by nightmares and anxiety. Alcoholism was rampant among them, a way to numb the conscience and dull the memories. Some were driven to suicide, unable to live with the ghosts of the hundreds they had sent to their deaths. They were the living cog in the machine of state terror, and in the process of breaking others, they were often broken themselves. No reign, no matter how terrifying, lasts forever. The use of the executioner's hook began to wane with the dawn of a new era, the Enlightenment. In the 18th century, thinkers across Europe began to challenge the very nature of justice, advocating for human rights and questioning the use of cruel and unusual punishment. The idea that spectacular suffering was a legitimate tool of the state came under intense scrutiny. The decline was not instantaneous. One pivotal moment reportedly came when Empress Maria Theresa of Austria witnessed an execution by hanging on a rib hook. The sheer brutality of the event so horrified her that it led to the abolition of that specific practice in her domains. it was a sign of a profound shift in sensibilities. Justice began to move from the public square to behind prison walls. The invention of the guillotine in 1792, though now a symbol of terror itself, was designed at the time as a more humane and efficient alternative to the prolonged agonies of the past. By the 19th century, the hook had largely vanished from judicial use in Europe. Today, examples of these terrible instruments survive in museums, displayed behind glass, in places like the Medieval Crime Museum in Rothenburg, Germany. They are chilling artifacts, stripped of their power but not their horror. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about what our ancestors considered normal, about the thin veneer of civilization, and about the capacity for calculated cruelty that lies within human systems of power. The hook is more than just a piece of rusted iron. It is a legacy. It serves as a stark reminder of the darkest capabilities of human ingenuity and the enduring traumatic impact of state-sanctioned violence. The story of the executioner's hook is a dark journey showing how an object can become a continent-spanning symbol of terror. It reminds us that the line between order and barbarism is dangerously thin, and that the methods a society uses to punish its own citizens reveal its deepest truths. The hook's legacy isn't just in the pain it caused, but in the questions it forces us to ask about justice, power, and memory. How far have we truly come? If you found this exploration into the darker corners of history compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories that are often forgotten. Let us know in the comments what you think about this form of justice and its place in history. Thank you for watching.